So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session on submitting nominations to the Royal Society of Canada. My name is Sheila Embleton. I'm at York University in Toronto, and I am currently the Secretary of the Royal Society of Canada. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. First of all, let me introduce Christopher Dragan, who is from Walter House in Ottawa, so member of Royal Society's staff, and he will be doing the bulk of the presentation today. We then have with us three members of selection committees, actually not currently serving as members, but recently have served, and I will introduce each of them individually. We have Richard Devlin from Dalhousie University. We have François Paré from the University of Waterloo, and Connie Eves from UBC. So, François Paré est professeur titulaire à l'Université de Waterloo et membre de la SRC depuis 2010. Il a siégé au sein de la comité de sélection de la division des lettres pendant 3 ans. Professor Paré is a distinguished professor emeritus in French studies at Waterloo and fellow of the Royal Society since 2010. He was a member of the Divisional Selection Committee from 2015 to 2018. Richard Devlin is Professor of Law and Acting Dean at Dalhousie University and a Fellow of the Royal Society since 2015. He was a member of the Social Sciences Divisional Selection Committee from 2016 to 2017 and later chair of that same committee from 2018 to 2019. Il est professeur de droit et doyen intérimaire à Dalhousie University et membre de la SRC depuis 2015. Connie Eves is a professor at the Department of Medical Genetics at the University of British Columbia and distinguished scientist at the BC Cancer Terry Fox Laboratory. She is a fellow of the Royal Society since 1994 and also served in the Divisional Selection Committee for Life Sciences from 2018 to 2019. Connie Eves est professeure au Department of Medical Genetics at the University of British Columbia et éminente scientifique au BC Cancer Terry Fox Laboratory. Elle est membre de la SRC depuis où elle est aussi exercée comme membre du comité de sélection de la division des sciences de la vie. So thank you everybody for participating today, and I'll turn it over to Chris to start off the presentation.
Thank you, Sheila. Please bear with me as I set up a screen share. So I believe you should be seeing my first slide here on how to submit nominations to the Royal Society of Canada. And I'll begin by introducing myself. So I'm Christopher Dragan, and I'm the Membership and Engagement Coordinator here at the RSC. I'll be giving a quick speech for roughly 30 minutes, going over all of our nominations procedures before ceding the floor to our special guests, who Sheila has already presented, and they will be answering your questions at the end about their experiences as former selection committee members. Et pour ajouter une note, cette présentation se fera uniquement en anglais aujourd'hui, par intérêt de temps. Si vous voulez arranger un temps pour que je vous le présente en français, veuillez me contacter par la suite. Merci. So, I'll begin by presenting the different kinds of members here at the RSC. As you can see, there are four, the first four categories here are for fellows. And the fifth category is for college members. There are small distinctions between each of these fellow types. So beginning with the regular fellows, they make up the bulk of our membership, and they're either nominated by another fellow or by the office of one of our institutional members, which you may already belong to. These candidates must be either Canadian citizens or Canadian permanent residents for the last 3 years. Next, there are international fellows. These are candidates who have promoted the objectives of the RSC with clear relevance to Canadian society, but are neither citizens nor permanent residents of Canada. We allocate specific slots, specific and separate slots for these candidates, but they're nominated in the same way as regular fellows are. Next are specially elected fellows. These are candidates who have made significant contributions to Canadian society and academia. Similarly to international fellows, they are also assigned their own special and unique slots each year and are also nominated in the same way as regular fellows. And finally, the last category of fellows are honorary fellows. These are nominated and elected directly by the Royal Society Council, and so they will be beyond the scope of this particular presentation. Finally, the fifth and not least category, the college members. These are Canadian and permanent residents who at an early stage of their career have already demonstrated a high level of achievement in their field. So let me go over some key differences between our fellows and our college members. Maybe the first one is the annual intake. As you see, we admit more fellows than college members each year, roughly 90 versus 50. Next, you'll see the duration of their membership. So fellows, once elected, are members of the Royal Society for life, beginning at their induction ceremony. And as a side note, this year's induction ceremony will be on Friday. So we hope to see you there as well. College members only serve a 7-year term as members of the RSC, also beginning at the induction ceremony. College members pay less dues than fellows, roughly half. However, they don't benefit from the RSC post-nominal. That is reserved for our fellows of the Royal Society of Canada. Finally, for nomination eligibility, fellows can be nominated at any time, any point in their career. There are no restrictions. They can be resubmitted as many times as needed. However, college members, we are restricted to a 15-year eligibility period since the conferral of their PhD or terminal degree. Now on this table, maybe the main question that we do get is on this final distinction. So when does the eligibility period begin? Well, to use a specific example, so for this year's cohort, which will be the 2021 cohort, they must not have received their terminal degree earlier than January 1st, 2006. However, we do offer some extensions in specific situations, but you can contact me to ask if your candidate might apply. Finally, what constitutes a terminal degree in this case? If a candidate has never received a PhD, the term terminal degree might be hard to define. So again, if you do have a promising candidate who falls into this category, I welcome you to contact me after this meeting. My contact coordinates will be provided at the very end. Let's go over some key numbers about our members. We have over 2,400 fellows currently, and roughly 370 college members. Our fellows are further broken down into 3 academies, the Academy of Arts and Humanities being the first, the Academy of Social Sciences being the second, the Academy of Science being the third. These academies are further broken down into the 9 divisions that you see here, also in order. And a nominator who's putting forward their candidate must assign the candidate to a specific division so that their file can be reviewed by a committee of their peers. A similar process is done for the college members. However, in that they are selected by their peers. However, once they are elected, they're not broken into any further academies or divisions. They are simply college members. We've opened our call for nominations for the upcoming cohorts on September 1st, and the deadline will close on December 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So fellows and institutional members may nominate both fellows and college member candidates. And college members also have the ability only have the ability to nominate other college members. Candidates may reapply as many times as they wish. However, for college members, I will remind that they must respect the 15-year eligibility period that I recently mentioned. Next, the following are the elements for a nomination dossier, beginning with the nomination form, a primary nominator's letter, the co-nominator letters, which are only applicable for fellows nominations. We will require 2 co-nominator letters, one of which must be signed by a current fellow. Next are the letters of reference. Different academies will require a different number of letters, and the college will only require 2 letters of reference. Next is candidate statement, which only applies for college members this time. This is where the college candidate themselves will explain and articulate what they will bring to the college if elected. A good idea here is for the candidate to look up our current list of college members and describe how they might collaborate with them on interdisciplinary research in the future. Finally, all nominations must contain a detailed appraisal from the primary nominator, that's the one writing the nomination, going over the credentials of the candidate and why they're worthy for selection at the Royal Society. The primary nominator will also include an academic citation for the candidate. This will be used for public and press releases by the Royal Society if they are elected. And at the very end, the candidate must append their CV, which is significantly longer for the fellows. As you'll see, 50 pages versus 10 pages. Next, I'll go over some key general points to look for while preparing your dossier. So first of all, I strongly recommend starting early. As you know, anything can happen between now and the deadline, and you want to be prepared for any possible eventuality. Maybe a reference might fall ill at the inopportune time. So you want to have time to adjust. Next is within the dossier, within the detailed appraisal and the reference letters themselves, demonstrate in plain language how your candidate's research has impacted their field. I'll point out that although they are evaluated by a committee of their peers, their specialty might not be well known by a specialist in another but similar field. To give an example, neuroscience is not the same as cardiology, although both are in life sciences. So think about plain and clear language to demonstrate why a certain award that they've won is important, why a certain innovation is impactful, or why your particular candidate's contributions are noteworthy. Next, try to ensure that you select co-nominators and referees who are themselves noteworthy and who can provide a clear and unbiased opinion of the work of the candidates and how monumental it is in their own field. And finally, I'll conclude by that letters, this usually comes up for college members, college nominations, I should say, but letters of recommendation should not, as much as possible, should not come from the candidate's PhD committee. While we do allow it, we strongly believe that a reference from someone outside of their PhD committee is the most obvious and strongest indication of early impact in their field. Again, this mostly applies to the college nominations. I'm going to slowly conclude here by describing how our selection committees are created. So these are formed with by ensuring diversity in geographical considerations, selecting members from different affiliations, and also balancing by gender. Each division has their own selection committee. The college selection committees I'll go over in my following slide. We also ensure that during the selection itself, that there are no real or perceived conflicts of interest. So a common example of perceived conflict of interest is when a candidate comes from the same institution as a member from the selection committee. So that selection committee member will simply sit out on evaluation for that particular member. The size of the selection committees will vary depending on the size of the division. So larger divisions will have a larger selection committee. And the composition of the committees themselves are along the lines I've just described. We're also very keen on receiving candidates from a broad variety of fields and from many different backgrounds, including women, francophones, and scholars who are involved in Indigenous communities. Finally, I'll emphasize that there are a limited number of slots each year, roughly 90, as I said, and that is across all divisions and academies. So you'll see some divisions only have 10% success rates in a given year. So I encourage you not to get discouraged if your candidate does not make it in a certain year, because there are times where competition can be particularly fierce. And for the college, many of the same considerations apply. We break out the selection committees into subcommittees based on their specialties, similar to how the divisions are broken down. And each of these subcommittees will put forward a list of candidates to the College Council recommended for election, but it's the College Council who has the final say on who is elected to the college. However, the good news is that for the college, there's a slightly higher overall success rate at roughly 20%. So that will conclude my brief presentation. I'd like to open, well, first of all, this is my contact information, so please contact me after this meeting if you have any further questions. But I'd also like to open the floor now for your questions to our former selection committee members here in attendance who have graciously given us their time to share their experiences. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Christopher. I'm not certain if you had a chance to follow the chat, probably not while presenting, but we should make sure that we try to deal with the questions there as well. I think maybe first I will invite any of our selection committee members, former selection committee members, if they have any comments they want to make or anything to add before we open it to the rest of the floor. No? So Richard, Francois, yeah, Francois?
Well, perhaps I can just add a couple of things because I think the presentation was very clear, and thank you very much, Christopher. What was not in Christopher's presentation is the, how should I say, the value factor of the Royal Society and why you should be presenting a candidate in a particular year. And I think it's my experience as a committee member, most of the candidatures that were not selected were simply not strong enough in the sense that one has to remember, and I will say that especially in French Canada, one has to remember how high the Royal Society of Canada is ranked in terms of awards. It has high value in universities and in society. So the candidates we put forward really we have to be convinced as nominators that they are actually more than good, more than excellent. They really have to be very good. And if you can't do that, and the referees can't do it because their letters seem to be just, then it's not a good candidate.
Anything that, yes, Richard.
Yeah, I can follow up on that. I mean, starting in the committee that I chaired, there was a lot more people who we thought were worthy, but we were limited to 16 candidates only. So it's a very competitive field. There's no doubt in my mind that 25 or 30 of the people were really worthy of succeeding, but we just had limited numbers. So it is a very competitive and difficult decision to make.
Maybe I can just add, I think maybe it's important to emphasize that the instructions given to how you nominate by the college are extremely well written and detailed. I think a lot of people don't go back and read them carefully and follow them very carefully. One of the issues that I think is often encountered is the letters that come from external support letters. Referees, they're not well instructed in terms of how they write a letter that sounds like it's from a very strong, independent, external reflection of the field at large. And that's what the committee has to go by, because they can't be experts in every field. And so that's extremely important, and it takes time. Can't go to get such a letter from someone at the last minute. They just don't fly very well. And the other thing I would mention is, you know, there's a growing awareness that we should be looking very carefully to members of the academic community who are not brought up to be self-promotional. And it's really a responsibility of the fellows and their institutions to look around and try to really promote those people, because they're just as worthy. They just come from a background that doesn't sell themselves so strongly. And I think the committee is aware of that, but the selection committee can't do that. They can only select from what they receive. So I would just send out that message, because it can work, but you know, it works by fellows working at it.
Thank you.
Sheila, I can make a few additional comments that I could reflect on as highlights. I've probably like 6 things that people might just want to bear in mind, going beyond Chris's more formal structure, as to some of the variables that I thought are worth particularly considering having chaired a committee. So I can briefly just highlight what some of those are in terms of influences on the committee I've worked with. I guess the first one is, my sense is committees were very keen on having a diverse set of folks in their particular cohort. And by diversity, we meant geographical diversity, diversity based of race, gender. An important one that came up at times was diversity in large schools and small schools. I mean, the reality is that the larger schools tend to be highly represented, but for others, it's important to have representation from smaller schools across the country. And that's an issue that I think is worthy of careful consideration. And the other is making sure we get diversity within disciplines within our academy. We want to make sure, so diversity, I think, was one of the most important variables for my group. The second sort of variable that I think is important to emphasize is letters of reference. This has been touched upon, but I think it's helpful to have not just national letters of reference, but also, if possible, international letters of reference. And so I think that's something that to think about in trying to get the file diverse enough in that sense. A couple of times around conflicts of interest, this is my third point. I was surprised at who some of the referees were for some of the candidates. They just seemed way too close, in my opinion, to be giving letters of reference. And I think that did some candidates a disservice. So I think a lot of attention should be paid to just how closely connected are the nominees and the referees. Fourth point I would identify is some schools have clearly, some universities clearly have put a lot of effort into preparing the files. Sometimes, however, they come across as a little bit boilerplate. They seem to be sort of recycled from one cohort to another. It seemed to work previously, and maybe we'll use this one again and sort of switch things around a little bit. Certainly for my committee, I think there was an interest in files that sort of identified the uniqueness, the specificity, the authenticity of a candidate. And the more you can sort of bring out that, the uniqueness of this character, their courage, their originality, their innovation, I think that tended to help a lot. And so the boilerplates, I think, in the end, sometimes backfire, even though they're very polished. They seem to come across sometimes as just a bit too refined. A debate that's come up in my committee at times was the importance of metrics. And different disciplines put different weights on different metrics. And so when you're trying to get diversity of disciplines within your cohort, I think there needs to be careful sensitivity to what degree folks rely on metrics within their own discipline, because they are clearly controversial from discipline to discipline. And I guess finally, an issue that came up quite often was impact. And for some folks, impact really had to do with, well, how well cited was this person? Which journals were they cited in, et cetera. So it's very much an academic impact. But increasingly over the years, there's been a focus on social or cultural impact. And I would say that there were differences of opinion among committee members on how we rate impact. And I think to some extent that was generational. So there are sort of 5 or 6 general points I would make, having sat on a committee for a couple of years, and some of the highlights or maybe touch points that people might want to think about. Thank you.
Are there further comments from the panelists? Okay, then I think that I'll maybe run through some of the questions in the chat. Christopher has been trying to answer some of those. And so there was a question about whether college members can be nominated while they're still in their 7-year period in the college. And Christopher has actually answered that. But let me also say that, in fact, we do have several such fellows at the moment. So it can work. They're evaluated as prospective fellows. There's nothing positive or negative about them having been in the college, other than, of course, they're very accomplished if they were in the college in the first place. So that will carry through in the CV, but it's not taken into consideration in any direct way. I think the question about life science, medical sciences has probably been answered. Then there was a question about the idea that it's not good to have somebody from the candidate's PhD committee. And then there were questions about what's the actual definition of the PhD committee and so on. I think what the main point is here is that one is trying to show for the college members that they are an independent scholar, that they have carved their own path, their own career. And to the extent that you rely too much on those that are from their still formative years, this can be seen as that they're not fully fledged yet. But it's not an absolute prohibition at all. It's just that you're trying to make a certain kind of case, and that may be harder if you're using people who are members of their dissertation committee, specifically the supervisor in particular. There are questions also about, would all international reference letters be a good idea, or should there be at least one Canadian referee? I think you're looking for some form of balance. In the end, you want the best referees for your file. It will also depend to some extent on what the field of the candidate is, right? I mean, if your field is Canadian history, chances are you're going to have a lot of Canadian referees, but you'll probably still want to have perhaps at least one international. But there's no particular rule about that. And again, that might be something the panelists would want to comment on, what they have seen over the years. There are a few questions here that are more technical in some ways, that perhaps Christopher will be able to answer. Let's see what else I've got here in the chat. Reapplying, yeah, you just reapply. I mean, it's the same way if you don't get your SHRC grant, you just try again. And it is a new application. There was a time in the past where applications were kept for up to 3 years, but that produced an awful lot of problems of various kinds, and I didn't derail us by explaining that in detail, but it's just become so much easier to take a new file every year, and that is what the selection committee will see, is that new file, not the old files. Referees from industry or end users, yes, it can be certainly possible, and again, it will depend a lot on the file that you're dealing with. We see government or policy people sometimes writing, since part of what you're evaluating is the impact of that body of work, and I don't mean impact in the sort of narrow metric sense, but the reach of the work, the impact of the work, how this person being in the field has made a difference wherever you can find people who are going to testify to that. And so we certainly see people from government, for example, talking about that. With a lot of the engaged scholarship, we see about some community leaders, for example, writing. Somebody here has asked about, for very niche disciplines, it can be difficult to find referees who are not connected. I think the main point is to avoid pretty clear outright conflict of interest. Some of you may know I'm in linguistics, and we have some fairly strict rules, for example, at my university about conflict of interest on hiring committees. One of the things we kind of joke about is that if you have, 6 York linguists on a hiring committee, and none of them have ever met that candidate at, for example, a conference, there's probably a problem. So it's really about the degree of relationship, the degree of conflict of interest, but it's certainly recognized that you will often know people. I mean, if you're prominent in your field, of course you're going to know lots and lots of the other people. I think perhaps for the moment that's enough of my voice. Perhaps Christopher can answer. There's a technical question about the best ways to put the 250-word biographies. There's a question about example letters. There is a booklet on the Royal Society website, which has sample letters, talks about the components of a file. It's all there. Christopher could maybe put the reference to that, the website, in the chat. And I'll turn it over to others now because you've heard enough of me for a while.
Sheila, can I just add a few things to this? And I think Richard, actually, I just want to say that what Richard said earlier is 100% to the point. It really is very exactly what happens. Maybe I can just comment on a couple of questions I saw go by at the bottom of my screen here about letters of references and international letters of references. And I'll speak only for the arts part, and maybe social sciences could fall in within that category as well. I think committees expect generally that there will be some sort of international recognition. And I agree with Sheila that sometimes it's not possible. And I work on something extremely local. If you work on Acadian literature, it's going to be very difficult to find an international scholar who will know enough about the field. But still, in general, I think we expect that. However, I think you need to be very careful with those because many international scholars, especially in Europe and in other parts of the world, do not know exactly how to formulate this kind of letters. They are either too short or they're boring. They're not engaged enough. And so I think you really have to be quite selective in who you're going to ask and tell them, really coach them into writing that letter the way that you think will resonate for the committee. So I would say that's better to have 3 Canadians, in the case of the arts, 3 Canadians or Americans, rather than having an international letter that will sound terrible. So that's one thing. The other thing to know also, again, because I saw a note at the bottom of the screen, just to add one thing, is the fact that the selection committees are not, just to emphasize that very often we do not, I mean, there are multidisciplinary committees in themselves, although there are many people involved in this. And very often it's not that the committee has a monolithic view of a candidate where all the members of the selection committee say, oh, this is not a good candidate. It's a real debate that goes on. And very often committee members will just have to say, well, okay, I mean, if there are 2 or 3 of you who want this candidate, let's go with it. So the files are never unanimous or rarely unanimous unless it's somebody that everybody says, you know, oh, it's really, we needed to do that a long time ago. This is really, it should have been done before, that this person should be nominated and so on. But very often it's a real debate. So the more, how should I say that, the file needs to be coherent. It needs to form a body of knowledge about this person that works together so that the letters of references confirm the statement you made, the evaluation you presented in your 3-page evaluation. All this has to talk to each other. If it's all scattered, it doesn't work. Thank you. I think I'll stop for now.
There was a question in the chat about the various equity, diversity, and inclusion questions. And I think this might be somewhere where the previous panelists could say a little bit about that. Certainly they are taken into account. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, and there are certainly no quotas, but they can perhaps comment on that. And also that there may be other elements to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We talked about other kinds of breadth earlier. So maybe one of the former selection committee members could take up the EDI question.
Maybe I can respond to that. Certainly when I was on the evaluation committee, selection committee, the overriding principle was excellence, top excellence. And usually there's a top excellence in diverse areas. And it actually doesn't become so difficult to look across the spectrum of disciplines that are being covered, and they're very broad. In the group that I was on, we were looking at things from plants to evolution to medical applications to very, very diverse statistical areas. And when one looks for outstanding, what's the most outstanding in across those different areas, and that actually simplifies it, because some of the areas are more represented than others, and they have gradations. What becomes very difficult is looking at one discipline that's not so well represented as another. But usually the letters, I would say, the letters are really, really important. I can't emphasize more what Francois was saying. And in my experience nominating, I've had to work very hard often with the referees to help them restructure, rewrite, redesign all the way through the process. And to the comment about boilerplate, you know, it's like any creative activity. Anything that's boilerplate, it comes through. And so that detracts from the impact. That detracts from the actual originality of the person being nominated. So I can't emphasize, these are very, very important, outstanding activities that are being chosen, and it requires a lot of effort to go into the nomination, and it requires a lot of effort to go into the person who is on the selection committee to capture what are the top features.
Sheila, can I add something about diversity?
Please.
If I can? There is no doubt, at least the committee that I sat on, and the committee changed over the years, there's no doubt that diversity is considered. It's always in the back of the mind. It's a very wide view of what diversity is, though, in those committees. It's not just diversity of gender, diversity of identities, and so on. As you pointed out earlier, Sheila, it has to do with geographical diversity. It has to do with small universities versus large universities. Committees are extremely aware of that. They're also aware that in universities there's a kind of hierarchy of disciplines. That if you apply from theology in the arts academy, that might not be too cool. Or, you know, that economics is superior to other disciplines in the colleges of social sciences. So that the committees are extremely aware of that. And I think they probably even go in the other direction in making sure that all forms of diversity are considered here, including disciplinary?
I think I addressed diversity in my opening comments, so I don't think I need to say much more. I agree with Francoise and Connie.
Okay.
I have an interesting question from one of our members here in the chat. It's from Peter Leibitz, current FRSC. This is a question for all of our panelists. And do you recall a discussion or discussions about difficulties ranking between top of niche versus a candidate who's important in a global discipline? So maybe if I'm understanding correctly, were there moments where you had to split between a top niche candidate and an important an important candidate from a global area? I'll leave it at that.
Chris, I'm not fully understanding the questions. Maybe the person that asked it could just ask it themselves directly. If that's possible.
Possibly.
Sure. I'll pop on here. I'm sitting on one of the selection committees now, and we've had problems where there's an area, and you've all touched on it, which is relatively small definition, maybe not a lot of people working in the area. And this person is really, really great. And we're sort of running out of nominations. And then we've got another person who's in an area that there's tens of thousands of researchers, and maybe they're not at the absolute top of that pile. We struggled a little bit with the application of the idea of inclusive excellence across those sorts of things. I'm just wondering if people outside of it, in this case, environmental earth sciences, had a similar sort of problem.
Sheila, can I say something about that?
Go ahead.
This is Francois. I don't know if I even reformulated. I'm not sure I understand what you went through, Peter. There's a tension, though, if I understand this well. There's a tension in committees between what I think we're calling a niche candidate, someone who has had an impact in a very, very narrow area, but really a seriously international impact, and someone who's generally superior. I hesitate to say this, but I think the committees tended to favor impact. Impact in terms of academic impact, but also in terms of social and cultural impact. That was a very important remark that was made earlier. The dossiers that were less successful were from colleagues who were excellent in general. I mean, everybody works hard. Many people work very hard in universities, and they have very good CVs. So they were really excellent CVs, but there was nothing that really drew the attention to the committee to something special that brought an impact on society. And so I would tend to say that the committees they look at, rather than niche, they look at, is there an area where this person had a real impact? Academically, in the sciences, in the arts, wherever it is, but the word impact was probably more important than niche.
Richard.
I would concur with that. And I think the members of the selection committee, in my experience, were very sensitive to that exact issue. And that is sort of the first and foremost thing that is being looked for. You can call it excellence, you can call it impact. Usually, if it's there, it comes out in the letters, and it comes out in the awareness of people on the committee of, you know, something that has influenced the field, not just a good solid track record. So it's very important that that come out in the nomination package and be easy to understand by the members of the selection committee, but you know, that's what they're looking for.
Perhaps I can make a comment. I guess in my experience, it actually, I think, depended on the committee from year to year, because I think when we looked at, again, go back to the diversity criteria, it may have been that people felt that a particular niche category was sort of, in a sense, underrepresented, and that might get bumped up in the eyes of some committee members. And if someone was maybe a leading person in their field, but not necessarily the top person in the larger field, the whole process is very much, it almost had an alchemy to it, that depending on who brought what to the table, and as we actually crunched the numbers and we had our group conversations, there would be a sort of a real sort of conversation dialogue among the committee members, sort of playing off these excellent candidates in different ways. And I think it really did depend on the particular panel in the particular year and how people, in a sense, sort of stood up and advocated for those who they thought were stronger than the others. So I may not be quite as sort of categorical as Francois or Connie. I find it was very context specific from year to year. I could have imagined a decision happening differently with a differently composed panel. So there's no direct answer. I think a lot of this really does depend on the year and the spokespersons for the committees.
Which is also another reason why if your candidate is not accepted in a given year, you should try again, right? It's not that you're rejected forever. I mean, there can be all kinds of ways to redo a file, repitch the file, maybe get a better letter of reference, or, you know, lots of things could change and your candidate may have had more impact in the interim, but it is something to keep trying again. It's not something you do once, and if you're not successful, you just leave it.
Can I ask a question of the people who've organized this meeting? It would be interesting, I think, to hear, and I don't know, how the actual selection committee members are chosen. I wasn't on selection committees long enough to understand evolution, but I get the sense that they too have changed over the years to try to promote all the principles that we're hearing about. But I don't actually know how that is managed. And that's part of this same issue that covering all these questions that we're all discussing today.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I could talk a little bit about that, since I oversee the selection process as a whole without sitting on any committee. First of all, it's handled by each academy. So Academy 1, Academy 2, Academy 3. So within the academy, they come up with the selection committee members, and they strive for a balance of people who have served before, who are new. So you keep, you know, that turnover, but also the diversity in all the different ways that we've talked about today. If possible, no two members from the same institution, trying to balance off the disciplines. So within the arts and humanities, for example, you know, you try to have people from history and from philosophy and from, you know, languages, linguistics, from the visual arts and so on. You know, you don't want to have a committee made up of, you know, 5 historians and 3 philosophers who are then evaluating the whole field. You try to get that balance as well. That being said, there is an element also of persuasion sometimes. It's actually a fairly onerous task to sit on one of the selection committees, because there are a lot of files each year and a lot of reading to do. So, you know, it's a fairly hefty task for a member to sit on a selection committee. But we do try to make sure about all the turnover and the diversity and so on. That's very, very important. Okay, I'm not sure if we still have more questions from the audience at this point. We still have approximately 10 minutes.
Sheila, can I say something about francophone applications? Since
yes, please do.
I think there should be a component of some sort about that here. And there are some misgivings about applications from francophone institution and francophone candidates. Sometimes it is spelt, and I hear it, that, you know, the chances are not good, the competition is fierce. And I think maybe Richard can comment from the science point of view here, because there is no division, linguistic division, as there is in the arts academies for the selection. Just to point out that the candidates from the francophone universities and the francophone candidates, even from minority institutions around Canada, are certainly treated the same way, and the committees are extremely aware of that. We were talking about diversity earlier, and that is part of diversity. There's no doubt that the Royal Society wants a fair representation of francophone candidates, makes a lot of efforts, in fact, to reach out. It has to be, I have to be reminded that, I'll give you just a short anecdote here. When I was elected to the Royal Society, I got all sorts of messages of congratulations from my institutions and so on. But all my brother-in-laws, everybody whom I know in English Canada congratulated me. It was a society-wide recognition. Nobody wrote me from Quebec because Royal Society is not first and foremost in people, and people just don't know what it is. So there's a long way to go there. But the candidates have to be, they are solicited by the Royal Society and they are treated equally. It seems to me, at least in the arts and social sciences, I think they are. And I suspect that in sciences as well, because they're the whole communication, scholarly communications, that's in English as well. So just to say that, an encouragement. But they do have to be excellent candidates, as I said earlier, not just people who work hard.
I'd just add, in terms of the Social Sciences Academy, it's actually split between English and French. So I've only sat on the English division. I haven't sat on the French division.
Okay, so are there more questions from the audience? We still have 8 minutes.
Sheila, I don't want to talk too much here, but let me just add one little point, because I saw that a couple times when I was sitting on the committee. Applications that do have lots of typos, especially in the CV, they don't go very far. It may seem unfair because we all know that we have brilliant colleagues who are unable to write a CV properly, but still it just turns you off. So, and I mentioned the CV because most of the time that's where we could find errors, dates that were not working and so on. And that really needs to be reviewed by the people who put forward these nominations, that this has to be perfect.
It's good that you mentioned that. And that maybe leads me to make another comment, which is it's not good to try and put the whole file together like in the month of November, right? They're always due December 1st. Start early, and that gives you time to review for all of these kinds of things, but also to make sure you can have some dialogue back and forth, perhaps with the referees. You have time to straighten out the CV. You have time for everything, that you're not just rushed. It really is a file that needs to start early and kind of go through iterations and mature in a certain way.
There's a question from Maureen Mahoney in the chat. I can answer that from my division. So there are 9 committee members, but only 3 people read each file. And then they would rank them, and then we'd sort of collate all those and bring them together. And that seemed to work quite well. But there were just so many files, it was not possible for all committee members to read all files. So that's at least for my division, and maybe different for the other divisions.
And yeah, you're right, that there are a number of divisions that have an awful lot of applications, and they need to do it the way you've just described, just to make it at all manageable. But in other cases, it's a smaller pile that needs to be read, and there will be fewer eventually chosen as well, fewer slots. But they may be able to read everything, with every committee member. But they do. Some of the committees do operate in this kind of mini panel method just to be able to get through everything.
Maybe I can speak to that too. The panel I served on had a very large number and of applications, and they were split out. Usually what happens is it's fairly easy to discern the ones at the top and the ones that are at the bottom. And the whole way it proceeds is to kind of narrow down the top half or third of applications and really focus then on those. And I think most of the committee members then go in and read all of those carefully so that they can have a informed opinion, not just sort of top of the head type thing. And I would just reinforce the previous remarks about Francois about the quality of the application. You know, this is regarded as the top thing that you can be recognized by Canada in academic pursuits in the larger sense of the word. And so it warrants top attention to every single aspect of every detail. It's, you know, it's like a coronation, you know, and as soon as any of those are missing, it indicates to the selection committee members that somebody in putting together the package was not so concerned about that. And that message gets conveyed. So it's just really important, as Sheila says, to start early so you catch every single detail. You get other people to read every part of it to make sure that it's perfect and really conveys the top level message that is necessary to get into the top selection group.
Okay, thanks very much. I'd just like to point out we only have at this point 3 minutes remaining. So I would like to thank everybody for attending today. In particular, of course, thank also our panelists, our 3 panelists, Richard Devlin, Francois Paré, Connie Eves, and thank Christopher very, very much, Christopher Dragon from the Royal Society team in Ottawa for preparing the slides and the presentation. Thanks very much. Christopher is probably your best resource if you have questions for you to write to him, but I would also encourage you to take a look at the nominating guidelines that are in a PDF that you can of course print out if you prefer on the Royal Society website. This year's nominations are due on December 1st, which is quite soon now. It's too late to prepare a file really for this year if you haven't started yet, but you'll be in good time for the next year. The deadline's always December 1st. So unless Christopher has anything else to say, I think I'd like to wrap it up there. Christopher has put his email address into the chat. It's just nominations@rsc-src.ca. So, is there anything else pressing or in 1 minute? I'd
just like to thank the Royal Society for organizing this. I think it's been very helpful. And if anybody wants to write me, you know, you can just get my email address by Googling it or from the Royal Society. I'm happy to respond.
Okay, thank you.
I am too, yep.
Yeah.
Same.
And me. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Hope to see you in Montreal next year.